hoffe, es hat jeder schon einen guten Platz gefunden und bekommen. Eine große Freude, dass Sie alle da sind, vor allem zu diesem Thema. Und wir begrüßen jeden Einzelnen. Feel welcome. Und wir freuen uns über jeden Einzelnen, der da ist. Wir sind hier im Fiegelhaus. Das ist ein Ort, wo die Gemeinschaft Emanuel versucht, Brücken zu bauen. Brücken in die Gesellschaft hinein, Brücken zu verschiedenen Themen. Ich muss es vielleicht weiter weghalten. Ich bin Carola Neubauer und ich bin verantwortlich für die Gemeinschaft Emanuel in diesem Jahr in Wien mit einem wunderbaren Team. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass wir hier gemeinsam diese Veranstaltung machen. Wie immer eigentlich.
Ja, wie immer eigentlich, ja. Also ich freue mich auch, ich bin der Michi Frey, seit 10 Jahren mit der Gemeinschaft Emanuel auf dem Weg, hier eben im Fiegelhaus in der Akademie. Und wir versuchen eigentlich immer die großen Fragen unserer Zeit zum Thema zu machen, sie in einen Dialog zu bringen, mit Menschen ganz unterschiedlicher Weltanschauung. Und ich glaube, das Thema des heutigen Abends, die Armen und der Protest, ist nicht zufällig, denn gerade gestern ganz eine große Schlagzeile im österreichischen Fernsehen, Menschen, die von Armut betroffen sind, diese Gruppe wird immer größer. Die Armutsgefährdung nimmt immer mehr zu mit Inflation und viel mehr. Und wir dürfen es heute zum Thema auch machen, ganz konkret. Wir haben 2 internationale Experten eingeladen, aus Rom, aus Paris, und freuen uns, weil beide seit Jahren und Jahrzehnten eigentlich mit von Armut betroffenen Menschen nicht nur arbeiten, sondern wirklich konkret leben. Und ich freue mich einfach selber so, weil wir erhoffen uns heute einfach Inspirationsquellen, einfach auch einen neuen Zugang. Wie können wir uns wirklich neu solidarisieren, auch auf eine gewisse Art und Weise? Wie können wir uns neu berühren lassen, auch von denen, die wirklich arm sind? Und da erhoffe ich mir heute wirklich auch neue Inspirationen. Und ich freue mich da besonders aus Rom, jemanden zu begrüßen. Seit Jahren versuchen wir, ihn nach Wien zu holen. Heute ist es endlich gelungen. Ja, es ist wirklich so. Ich freue mich ganz, ganz besonders. Ja, das stimmt auch, das stimmt auch. Ganz, ganz herzlich willkommen mal Professor Dr. Cesare Zucconi. Ich würde sagen, ein außergewöhnlicher Mann. Warum? Er ist einerseits Historiker, er ist Politikwissenschaftler und arbeitet auch für die Gemeinschaft Sant'Egidio in Rom, ist Generalsekretär. Und diese Gemeinschaft ist insofern was Besonderes und auch sehr mit der Gemeinschaft Emanuel verbunden. Die haben so 2 große Themen, es sind wahrscheinlich mehr, aber 2 nenne ich, weil sie so wichtig sind. Das eine ist das Thema, sie arbeiten mit den Ärmsten der Armen und wirken mit diesen in Rom. Und das andere ist, sie setzen sich für Friedensbewegungen überall in der Welt ein und haben wirklich schon an qualitativ hochwertigen Friedensverhandlungen überall, ob das im Sudan war, ganz egal wo, teilgenommen. Und das ist wirklich eine große Erfolgsstory eigentlich auch von der Gemeinschaft. Und was mich besonders, auch was uns berührt hat, politisch nämlich, sie sind die Erfinder der humanitären Korridore für geflüchtete Menschen. Also es war schon eine Inspiration für viele Regierungen in Europa damals, dass sie das geschafft haben. Das ist ein großer Verdienst und ganz, ganz herzlich willkommen nochmal in Wien.
Ich darf den zweiten Experten vorstellen. Das ist der Louis-Etienne de Labarthe, hier mit seiner lieben Ehefrau, der Isabelle. Und der Louis-Etienne ist verantwortlich für die Kommunikation in der Gemeinschaft Emanuel in Paris. Und was ihn zu einem besonderen Experten zu diesem Thema macht, ist, dass er mit seiner Familie, mit den 4 Kindern und seiner Frau in einem Ort gelebt hat, der ganz besonders ist, in den Banlieues von Paris, in einem Integrationsprojekt, das heißt Le Rocher. Und das heißt nicht einfach nur vorbeischauen oder vorbeikommen und etwas tun, sondern wirklich mittendrin mit den Menschen zu leben, Freundschaften zu knüpfen. Viele der Kinder, also die Kinder haben vor allem Freundschaften geknüpft mit anderen Religionen, mit Kindern aus anderen Religionen, anderen Sprachen, anderen Kulturen. Und da haben Sie sehr viel Erfahrung gesammelt und sehr viel Wertvolles erlebt. Wir danken sehr, dass ihr den Weg auf euch genommen habt. Beide sind angereist. Also vielen Dank und wir freuen uns.
Und wir freuen uns jetzt zunächst gleich auf 2 Statements. Beginnen darfst du, lieber Cesare. Die Statements, weil es international ist, werden jetzt auf Englisch sein und auch der darauffolgende Talk dann, den wird die Steffi dann moderieren. Und jetzt freuen wir uns auf deinen Speech. Vielen Dank.
Danke. Es tut mir leid, dass ich auf Englisch sprechen muss, weil ich bin auch ein bisschen ein Wiener. Nein, ich scherze nicht. Ich habe 3 Jahre in Wien gelebt als Kind. Deshalb, da kommt meine deutsche Sprache oder mindestens die österreichische, kommt, sagen wir, aus dieser Zeit in Wien. Aber als Zeichen der Freundschaft und der Sympathie zu unseren französischen Freunden werden wir uns auf Englisch fassen. Ich wollte nicht so sehr, bevor ich es auf Englisch anfange, ich wollte nicht so sehr, sagen wir, Aktivitäten beschreiben oder Zahlen nennen, auch der großen Ungerechtigkeiten, die es in unserer Welt gibt, aber vielleicht euch ein bisschen anfänglich dann in der Debatte können wir darüber reden, ein bisschen den Geist und das Herz vermitteln des Seins mit den Armen in der Gemeinschaft Sant'Egidio. Also Sant'Egidio, as you know, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, Sant'Egidio, as you know, took its first steps a long time ago in February 1968 as a community of young people who took the gospel in hand and tried to live by it in the years immediately after the Second Vatican Council and in the climate of the 1968 student protests. The beginners of Sant'Egidio were all very, very young, 17, 18 years old. The most famous of many slogans on the walls of Paris written during the student demonstration was, "Be realists, demand the impossible." It was a slogan revealing the utopian charge of the student revolt of the time, which later had many questionable and partly tragic outcomes, which I will not go into here. Sant'Egidio was born in that climate, I would say, of audacity. I would like to stress the word, the audacity of young people to be protagonists, the presumption of believing they could do new things and change the world. After all, in the 60s, in many parts of the globe, people believed they could change the world, and the world seemed to be on the move. An air of change was blowing in Rome, where Andrea Riccardi, who is the founder of our community, and a group of friends took their first steps. In this climate, the group of young people who started Sant'Egidio perceived that it was not enough to talk about structural or political change. Something was missing that spoke to the heart of men and women, and this could only be the gospel and the word of the Lord. So, rather than turn to politics or protest, Andrea Riccardi and his friends decided to invest their young lives in listening to the word of God and following Jesus. Olivier Clément, a French Orthodox intellectual, a good friend of us, wrote in 1968, "Revolutions of violence only liberate to enslave in another way. The only creative revolutions in history are born from the transformation of hearts." And he was right. That is how we saw it more than 50 years ago and have ever since. Everything begins and is possible with the transformation of one's heart. In Rome, in the late 60s, we took a path that led to the outskirts, to the poor, to the shacks at the edge of Rome, that made it a city with corners of the third world. There were a lot of shelters. Mostly there were people from South Italy coming to Rome at that time. They were the migrants of that time. There we understood that you cannot leave the gospel away from the poor. The divorce between the church and the world of the poor has hurt both. And this divorce is also present when the poor, and this is always a temptation in the church, are reduced to being mere recipients of our Christian services. They are not friends, they are not brothers, and they have no place in the life of our communities. Pope Benedict XVI, visiting our soup kitchen in Trastevere in December 2009, said something very important. Here, those who serve and help are confused with those who are helped and served. And in the first place are those who are most in need. This is because in the poor, in their weakness, there is the presence of the Lord who said, "Every time you have done one of these things to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you have done it to me." And Jesus adds, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat," and so on. With realism and affection, the community began from then on to feel the presence of Jesus in the poor, in the periphery of Rome, and then, over the years, in the many peripheries of the world. And it is from the peripheries, I believe, and this is something that Pope Francis repeats always, from the peripheries that we understand the world we live in and can begin to change it, not from the center, from the peripheries. The poor, Pope Francis has repeatedly said, are a personal question for every believer and not a task entrusted only to Caritas or to Diaconia or some professional. It is John 23rd's conciliar dream of a church of all and particularly of the poor. A church that has the poor at its center, the poor as friends, as family members, as full members of the church. Praying, listening to the word of God, being with the poor, but also, you were mentioning it, as the community discovered in the late 80s, needing to fight for peace. Because, as our founder uses to say, war is the mother of all poverty. We have seen it in Syria, where after 12 years of war, which is not over, 90% of the population lives below the poverty line. We see it in Ukraine, which is now the poorest country in Europe. Death, destruction, millions of refugees and internally displaced persons, and national wealth reduced by 30% in 1 year. War, as a pope in the Middle Ages used to say, is evil. Here is Sant'Egidio's commitment to peace. We must be able to rid the world of the demons of war. We cannot get used to war, and this is the big temptation of our time, to get used to war, as if it were an inescapable companion of humanity. With the disappearance in Europe of witnesses to the horror of war, to the abyss of the Shoah, we have lost awareness of the terror of war and squandered peace on our continent. Not that there were not already wars elsewhere, but we Europeans thought they were the wars of others, that they did not concern us, except to worry about us about the inevitable flight of refugees of war to find safety in our own countries, like it happened in 2015, for example, with the Syrian crisis. I was struck by the meditation Pope Francis gave in a deserted St. Peter's Square in the middle of the lockdown on March 2020, in which he reminded us that we are all in the same boat, and added, we have gone ahead at full speed, feeling strong and capable in everything. Eager for profit, we let ourselves get absorbed by things and dates by haste. We did not stop at your calls, Lord. We did not wake up to wars and planetary injustices, and we did not listen to the cry of the poor and of our gravely ill planet. We have continued, thinking we would always remain healthy in a sick world. We would always remain healthy in a sick world. The cry of the poor, who listened to it? Who listened to what Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth? So many figures could be cited as evidence to the great inequalities of our time. The protests of so many go unheard. We are in the same boat, and yet we behave as we were islands, each one compared to the others, but also our rich north compared to the rest of the world, believing that we can go on like this. Have we learned the lesson of the pandemic? The war that seems to be spreading like wildfire would suggest we have not. The walls we build to protect us from refugees who continue to die in their search for a future, like in the Mediterranean Sea, would suggest we have not. In March 2018, on a visit to Trastevere, somebody of you, you have been in Trastevere, and we met in Trastevere, where Sant'Egidio, where is one of the places of Sant'Egidio. And for the 50 years of the community, Pope Francis told us, go forward on this path, prayer, poor, and peace. He was saying Sant'Egidio are the three P's, prayer, poor, and peace. And walking this way, you help to make compassion grow in the heart of the society, which is the real revolution, the revolution of compassion and tenderness, to make a friendship grow instead of the ghosts of enmity and indifference. I think, dear friends, there is a need for compassion, because today our societies are often cold and unwelcoming. So societies populated by so many I's, I mean not the I, but I, me, where the most fragile are forced to the margins, into loneliness. These are the many discarded of our time, to use Bergoglio's words. One could take the example of the elderly. There are many of them, because today, thanks to God, we live long. But they have often been left alone, segregated in institutions, and they are told that they are a burden, a problem for our societies. And they were those who built up our wellness, our richness. In the climate of '68, we felt the audacity to dream, to not accept things as they are. We did not accept that the poor would remain poor, that the gospel would not be shared with other people. The war and the pain of so many would be considered normal. One can be free, not intimidated by the past, and not obliged always to repeat it. The climate was a revolt against resignation and the notion that things are this way because that's the way they have always been. So they should be this way. The climate was about freedom to dream and audacity. Realism is to demand the impossible. The impossible is for there to be peace. The impossible is AIDS being defeated in Africa. One of the engagement of Sant'Egidio, bringing treatment to Africa, treating people in a country, in countries in where there is no treatment. Why? Why in Africa there is no treatment and we have everything? The impossible is that no one is left alone in our societies, and I could go on. How many things are considered impossible in a climate of general resignation and pessimism? In front of the war, we say peace is impossible. Our revolt against the impossible, which began in those years, met with faith in the gospel. And the gospel spoke of Jesus' miracles and victory over the impossible. He told the father, who was in despair over his epileptic son, everything is possible for those who believe. And he added, impossible with man, but not with God, for all things are possible with God. We have seen in the peace in Mozambique, negotiated at Sant'Egidio between 1990 and 1992, which put an end to a conflict that lasted 16 years and cost 1 million lives, that peace is possible. And I can tell other situations in which we are engaged. And peace, I believe, is possible also in our time. We must work to create trust and build bridges of dialogue and prospects for the future. John Paul II, at the end of a historic day in Assisi in October 1986, made a very important statement. He said, peace awaits its builders. Peace is a building site open to all, not only to specialists, wise men and strategists. Peace is a universal responsibility. Yes, peace is a universal responsibility. Peace concerns us all today more than ever. It is a building site open to all. And Sant'Egidio wanted to continue that historic day in Assisi by promoting year after year in a different city and country gatherings in the spirit of Assisi that embody a strong idea to build a culture of living together in the diversity. This is the challenge of our world and of our society, living together in diversity. Religious leaders from all over the world, exponents of secular humanism, and many other people come together to build dialogue and peace and offer an alternative to those who use faith to justify violence. And this is my last sentence. In a time like ours, marked by war, fear, and walls, we need to build bridges. I think this is also the work you do, to foster dialogue, reconcile, spread sympathy, imagine, and build alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The stage is yours, Louis-Etienne.
Hello. I'm sorry I don't speak a word of your beautiful language, except Grüß Gott. Yeah? Sorry. Oops. So we are Isabelle, my wife, and I, Louis-Etienne. Isabelle is a social worker, and works in the pastoral care of migrants in the Diocese of Nantes. And I am responsible of communication, as you have heard before, sorry. So the theme of the evening was a continuous protest against our injustices. A terrific theme. Otto asked us to give a testimony on how the encounter with poor people has revealed our and my injustices and has been a force of transformation in and around us. So here are some quick words. So before Le Rocher, I would like to talk about 2 years we lived at the beginning of our marriage in Haiti, 23 years ago. We left for 2 years of cooperation in mission with the Catholic Church. On the second day, we visited the National Museum of Haitian History. This visit was a very powerful moment. The Haitian people are former slaves, and who have freed themselves, on their own. It is a unique case in the history of the world when a whole people of slaves took their independence on their own. Slavery was an awful system of exploitation, of discrimination, as you know, a very violent negation of identity. But what has deeply shocked us is that we realize that this huge injustice of slavery has generated the extreme poverty of today in Haiti. Material poverty, institutional poverty, the fragility of family structures, the reproduction of violence, the phenomenon of domesticity, the abuse of force, and many, many examples. The consequences of this history are still here with us today. The current catastrophic situation, I don't know if you know this situation in Haiti, but it's totally catastrophic. In Haiti, and the extreme poverty are directly linked to this history. And we discovered that when we arrived in Haiti. We cannot turn the page of history in 2 clicks. It also destroyed and damaged our relation between Haitian and French people. And it still weighs heavily today. We have experienced how damaged and difficult relations can be thanks to this history. What opened the door to building relationship was the experience of failure at the very beginning of our mission. We were very helpless in terms of what we had to do. We couldn't do it. So the young Haitian saw that we were trying to help them, but we don't succeed to do it. And this enabled to enter into an equal dignity relationship. We realize that in our Western culture, we are full of feeling of superiority, indeed. We place a very high value on efficiency, on our project, on our skills. We discover the people who had a low self-esteem, despite a great national pride, a people who don't feel loved, who felt devaluated and humiliated for decades until today. The simple experience of not being able to carry out our mission properly, of not always feeling understood, this opens the door to friendship and to an authentic encounter. We have experienced very beautiful friendship, and at the same time, we also suffered from not being able to be completely Haitian among Haitians, from being foreigners, in fact, for not being completely integrated. This was the most difficult thing we have experienced there, but perhaps the most formative and powerful, in fact. This wound was a gift for us. We understood through through this experience, the word of Jesus, I was a foreigner and you welcomed me. Overcoming don't mean simply turning the page, but welcoming all the weight of the past, naming it, be able to ask forgiveness, and working to be restored in a new relationship. So we talk about historization with our friends. We exchange for the problem of the past, and we exchange forgiveness with some of them. This enables to build very deep relations that we still live until now. We are still in contact. And we were deeply moved too in Haiti by the resilience of many of them. I'm thinking of Martineau, who uses to choose joy every morning. Paul, who opened his school to welcome more than 100 people just after the huge earthquake in 2010. Gerda, we refused the asylum in US offered by the Biden government because she doesn't want to abandon her country. What lessons? This experience in Haiti opened her eyes to the injustice that foreigners can also experience in France. We understood that they could suffer to be foreigner in our country, whatever their financial situation and their reason for immigrating in France. So when coming back in France, we each took up a job, Isabelle as a social worker, and as an engineer in Michelin, the well-known tire company. And we decided to start welcoming some people of foreign origin at home and to be friends with them. We organized weekend hikes, shared meals, and so on. We were very happy to be, and step by step, we were very happy to be invited by themselves. I remember of Samir and Mehdi, who invite us to share a chorba, the famous soup taken at night for the break of the fast during Ramadan. And I wish a good Eid for our brothers, Muslim brothers, today. All the associations and all services, all the state service that help people are very useful. But what sustains and restores people the most is when they are looked upon, loved as brothers, as friends, as people of equal value to us. With Jack, a young Congolese man, we came to realize and to discover the tragedy of exile. Jack was victim of torture and deeply human treatment in his country, and after in France too. Similarly, with Ramsat, a young Chechen woman, we spent days of Christmas together, and many, many, many others. And in fact, we saw the banality of horror. Thanks to a change of job, we decided to live an experience in suburbs in Paris with the association Le Rocher. We lived for 9 years in Bondy, in the department of Seine-Saint-Denis, District 93, usually called in France 9-3. 9-3. Oh, you live 9-3? Oh. It's not really France. A department with more than 100 nationalities, more than 75% of people are of foreign origin. It is the youngest department in France, a department when 50% of the population changes every 10 years. It is like a large transit zone, a huge airport. And it is also a department affected by drug trafficking and the violence that goes with it. It is the poorest department in France and the highest one with the highest unemployment rate. In short, it is a department where very few people want to live. A point important to know, as we were neither in the drugs trade nor in the police, we were not personally insecure. Take care, we were not personally insecure. What is Le Rocher? It is a presence of fraternity in the heart of the poor suburbs, often called in France cité. French word cité means large building, mostly social accommodation. In concrete terms, Le Rocher, it is young people, single people, families, or retired people decide to live in a poor suburb, in a big city, for at least a year, to create close ties and friendships through schools, support activities, home visit, youth or family camps, neighborhoods, meals, cafe and street activities, and so on. But the aim is to create relations with people. Isabelle worked full-time for Le Rocher during 6 years, and I was involved in some activities. The most important is that all our family lived in the same way in this city during 9 years with our four children. In this department, we have lived 9 years of great happiness. 9 years of great happiness, why? Because we have experienced very beautiful relationships with a wide variety of people. Because the relationships are easy, direct, and very simple. We talk to each other, we welcome each other, we support each other in difficult times. Because we have witnessed wonderful solidarity. Daily life is often difficult for many people, but we support each other. The generosity of most precarious people is sometimes incredible. I think, for example, of Fatou and Kumba, two Muslim women who had very hard lives. One with a disabled son, the other getting up every morning at 5 o'clock to do housework on the other side of the capital of Paris. They were both subjected to domestic violence. And we were deeply moved when, on the day of our daughter Mariam's baptism, they came to make a donation to bring us money. We were very happy too, because there we have friends forever. Because our children have not become delinquent, but more. That's a joke. Okay. But in Bondy, in contact with our friends from other culture, other faiths, other system of thoughts, other education, our children have learned hospitality, the sense of family solidarity beyond the restricted circle of blood family. Respect for elders, the value of fasting, the freedom to meet anybody, the freedom to speak about their own faith. There were sometimes painful and revolting moments, like the death of Danny, a youth of 20 years, who was shot in the middle of the afternoon in a stupid dispute. Our eldest son, Raphael, who is preparing a political science exam, tomorrow precisely, testifies in his application file to this founding event for him. I read the quotation. My application to science politics is specifically linked to my life experience in Saint-Saint-Denis from the age of 5 to 14. Today, I can say that these 9 years were the most enriching of my life and shaped my vision of society. In Bondy, I lived next to a city where I made many friends. For the child I was, the word cité meant friendship, solidarity, simplicity, and sharing. The inhabitants of the cité are not rich financially, but rich in the heart. The funeral of Danny, a young man of 20, who was shot dead, made a deep impression on me. He was a Muslim, from a Christian family. There was a ceremony at the church and another at the mosque. The inhabitants of the neighborhood came to both places of worship whatever their religion. I saw women who did not have enough to live decently, bringing rice or coffee to the family. This simple and generous act made me aware that what gives meaning to our lives and build relation, peace, is to give oneself. I want to give myself to improve people's life and to build a more just and fraternal society. In particular, to make social structure evolve so that everyone can live in dignity. I'm very proud of my song. Amen. Thanks be to God. This closeness to the poor, it's a conclusion, sorry. This closeness to the poor has deeply changed us. We have been struck for these injustices which are like a thorn in our flesh that hurts us and pushes us to act. In Haiti, the country is now in indescribable chaos, under the power of gangs. It's a prayer intention because we have no ideas to how to help people now. But the drug that created the gangs in Haiti comes from Colombia and are consumed in the United States. The weapons do not come from Russia or China, but they come from the United States. Of course, there was complicity and corruption in the country, but the Haitian state wasn't strong enough to resist to the power of these trafficking networks. How are the Haitians responsible? The UN and the US are powerless and refuse to get more involved. Is it just and fair? In Saint-Denis, the drugs that plague Saint-Denis are consumed by the Parisian bourgeoisie. How are the young people of this suburb responsible? The big blocks of flats were built by private and public developers, not by the people of this city. The police, teachers, and civil servants are less efficient than in other departments. Who is responsible for this? Is it the inhabitants of the neighborhoods, or is it a lack of will and vision on the part of the states and the elites? Today in France, the suburbs are a challenge for our country. Today it is a failure of ruling classes, no doubt, who are incapable of thinking about the future of our country. In France, there are a huge generosity to welcome and take up the challenge of integration. But the political and media discourse maintains fear and keeps us inactive. This is an intellectual, moral, and spiritual failure. In France, thousands of women arrive because they are fleeing excision, sexual abuse, and marital violence, early forced marriage in many countries. Men flee because they are threatened and tortured by oppressive regimes, as in Afghanistan, Eritrea, Guinea, and many, many, many other countries. And yet, they find our doors closed. Fear and rejection of the foreigner is winning us over. I love this sentence of Reverend Martin Luther King. What frightens me is not the oppression of the wicked, but the indifference of the good. We can all become friends with people experiencing poverty. They are very close to us. First, in the neighborhood, in our neighborhood. It is not so difficult to meet people. We are sometimes on our doorstep, on the street, people from a different culture 2 blocks away. No, it's not that complicated. We just have to want it. When I met Mikhail, a young Russian conscientious objector who refused to fight in Ukraine, and we spent Easter together to fight in Ukraine, and whose asylum has just been refused in France, and who lives on the street, while his life is directly threatened in Russia. When I think on Alassane, who is committed to freedom and democracy in his country, and who has suffered torture and degrading treatment in prison, I ask myself, what am I risking for God and for the dignity of people? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louis-Etienne. Thank you so much. Kurze Zeit jetzt, war sehr intensiv, inhaltlich auch sehr, sehr dicht. 3 Minuten kurz zum Nachbarn drehen, zur Nachbarin und über das, was mich jetzt besonders inspiriert hat, was mich jetzt angesprochen hat, kurz austauschen, um uns gegenseitig einfach nochmal mehr ins Thema reinzuhelfen und danach starten wir direkt mit dem Talk. Also 3 Minuten Zeit zum Nachbarn, zur Nachbarin drehen und über das sprechen, was mich jetzt persönlich inspiriert angesprochen hat. Los geht's. Gut, dann würde ich sagen, kommen wir langsam wieder retour. Ja, ich weiß. So. Wir machen wieder weiter. Wenn ich euch bitten darf, alle wieder... Ja, Lärmpegel wunderbar. Funktioniert sehr gut. Unsere Talkgäste nehmen mal Platz. Wir freuen uns jetzt extrem. Auch Isabel ist mit dabei. Sehr, sehr schön. Und ich übergebe jetzt schon an dich. Danke, liebe Steffi, fürs Moderieren. Ich übergebe an dich.
A bisschen. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your speeches, so letting us have a glimpse of your life and your work. Isabel has joined us, and I wanted to ask you first, you work as a social worker and you work for the church in Nantes, and a lot of your clients are people who are migrating to France. And the political climate is changing. Right-wing government in Italy, not as an open, welcoming feeling for migrants in France, I suppose, as well as in Austria. How does it affect your work, and how do you stand against this hate or fear of foreigners?
Well, excuse me because my English is very bad and it's really difficult for me to...
Speaks French.
Okay. You will do the traduction.
We are waiting for Pentecost, but maybe... maybe it happens.
Yes. Yes, it's really difficult. In fact, in France, as you told us, many people are open to welcome foreigners. But I don't know if you follow the actuality in France. And people are afraid about their future, their money, financial difficulties. Okay, that's why they start to close their heart, to close the door for the migrants people. But in my work, I meet with, I can say, all the people we receive in this church service. They want to work, they want to integrate them in French society. And it's a real difficulty for us to welcome them and at the same time to tell them that they can't work because the law is not allow them to work. And then in this situation we obliged to help them to keep hope, and but in fact they keep hope, and the testimony they give me is deep, yes.
In fact, it's very, very difficult because the government is as a center, but we have never had such strong decision against welcoming migrants, because the current government is very afraid of the coming right extreme. So populism, and so they say if we do nothing, they will come. So the laws are very, very difficult. For instance, many people don't join accommodation, and it's organized like that. We don't want to build to organize accommodation to welcome people, because if we welcome them, more will come. So it must be difficult for them. So we prefer that they live in the street, and it's more and more like that. It's the same with the job. We refuse the job. So during 5 or 10 years, they are here in France doing nothing. So when you do nothing all day, problems are increasing very quickly. Health problem, psychological problem, and so on. So it's very difficult because you help people one by one, and you have a system who is against you. So we can understand the whole questions, but in fact we are preparing the problems of tomorrow, and we see it has no sense. So it's difficult. So I admire my wife because she is continuing welcoming people, and you must have if she doesn't believe in Jesus, I would say it's too hard. And I admire my wife, but I admire too other people. So those who are very committed, association committed in struggling. Those who are mostly on the left side of political side, because in fact, if we don't struggle very strongly, nothing will change. So we both need doing something very simple, be confident in Jesus and pray, but we must protest. We must protest more, much more. And I admire those who protest.
Thank you. So Cesare Zucconi, Sant'Egidio also works with the poor in a now right-wing government. What's the answer for Italy from Sant'Egidio?
Speaking of migrants, yes, I think there are some decisions taken by the government in the last weeks which are worrying us a lot. I mean, not only the attitude towards the NGO ships in the Mediterranean, which are, I would say, it's really just a propaganda fight, because these ships are bringing more or less 5% of the people arriving in Italy. So the most of them, if they survive the trip in the sea, they are coming by their own means with some poor boats and ships. And what is worrying us more is the last decision they took. The government did a law trying to abolish the special protection, which is something less than the asylum. So this is for people who have not the right to be recognized as asylum seekers, because they are not coming from political persecution, but they are coming from earthquakes or natural disasters, or they are escaping violence. For example, a lot of women from Nigeria, or are slaves, or are sick. And these people, according to the Italian law, could have the special protection which was permitting them to the access to the health system, and even to find a job. now abolishing this law, this special protection, means that these people will all be irregular. So they will fall down in a irregular situation, losing their jobs, having difficulties with the health system, and so on. I mean, obviously we protested because Sant'Egidio is, you know, the story of Italy. I don't want to tell the story of Italy because it would take 2 days, more or less. But in some words, we are a country of migration, so millions of Italians were migrating, and in some way they had the same experiences that in America or elsewhere, even in North Europe, that we all remember Marcinelle, for example. So that now migrants have. We took some time to understand that we are an immigration country. So that starting from the 80s, more and more people from North Africa, but not only, were coming to Italy. And so what to do? We have not a model for the integration. I would say, if we can speak of a model in Italy, is that of the adoption. So there are a lot of people who work in the welfare. So they work in caring for elderlies or for sick people. They are doing a very important job, especially women from East Europe or from South America, from the Philippines. They are very, very important. But what I want to underline is that we cannot approach the issue of migrants. First, we cannot approach this issue as, I would say, an emergency issue, because we are facing a structural challenge that will be the same and even growing for the next decades. So the Italian government called for the, how to say it in English, like if there is a war, so a national emergency situation because of the refugees coming. But I don't think that 10,000, 20,000 refugees coming in a country of 60 million people, one of the most industrialized countries of the world, that we are speaking of an emergency like if it would be attacked by Russia or I don't know. So it's really exaggerated. So it's a structural challenge, and we have to find the solutions, and I would say it's also an European challenge. So we have to face that together as Europeans. Not because Italy is the shelter, the refugee shelter of Europe. This is not true, because in Germany, for example, there are more refugees than in Italy, or in Cyprus, there in percentage, there are more refugees than in Italy. So, but I think it's a challenge we have to face together. And the second thing I would underline is that we should be realistic, not ideological. We cannot face this challenge with ideology. So, for example, in Italy, the government decided to let enter about 80,000 people for work purpose. But in the same time, there were at least 240,000 requests from entrepreneurs, from restaurants, from everywhere saying, we need people, we need people, we need workers, we don't have workers. And more or less, the figures say that Italy needs 500,000 workers. So we are, every year, the population in Italy is reducing. So we are losing inhabitants. So we need migrants for the job. We need migrants also because of our demographic situation. We are older and older. I don't know if Italians will do more children in the future. I don't know. But you have to wait at least 20, 25 years to have somebody who can work if they start today to do children. So, I mean, therefore, I think it should be a realistic approach, not ideological approach, not a propaganda approach, but really approaching the issue in a realistic way and trying, because very often the people ruling the countries don't even know the real situation.
Well, thank you so much. I would want to maybe go into a more personal question. How did you manage to build community, or how does Le Rocher, the community, build community in these areas where they move, where there are people from different countries, different languages? How do you really create this sense of neighborhood, this sense of familiarity with people?
It's very, very simple. In fact, you met people in the street. You say, in Bondy, we talk to people. We say, hello, hello, okay. So, and we start to talk, and we invite people for a coffee, for a lunch, and sometimes we take time to play games together. And so we don't talk, we are not doing ideology, but just be friends. Sometimes we walk, so it can start with a parish, in our parish. So, and you hear people problems. Okay, you say, I'm going to visit you. And that's it. You have
In fact, the inhabitants of Bondy show us the key to build the community, because they have the sense of community, they have the sense of family in their culture, in their way of life. They used to support each other, to visit each other, and it's not our...
yeah, exactly.
Okay? Exactly.
It's not our initiative. In fact, they create relations very easily.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to also pose a question to you. You mentioned that Sant'Egidio also creates a lot of community with elderly people amongst other poor in Rome. How do you build community with them and with all, like you said, people who live on the edges of Rome or even in the streets?
Yes, I think we were born in the world of the students, so high school students. But from the very beginning, we didn't want to be just a reality of students or people going to university or something like that. We wanted to be with the people of the outskirts of the city. So. But not just going to help them, to support them. I'm speaking of the end of the 60s when Rome was growing in an amazing way. So because the people were coming from the south after the Second World War, they were trying to find a future, a better life. They normally had a barrack, a shelter somewhere, and they were living in very poor conditions. And what impressed us was not only the poverty of these families, they couldn't write and read, the adults, and the children were not attending the school because there were a lot of children, and especially the girls had to look at the younger brothers and sisters. But the women had a very difficult life, very hard life. They were beaten by the husbands who were quite violent. So what we decided, the richness we had was not only the possibility to help them, but the gospel. So to bring them the gospel as a liberation from their situation, from their condition. And it was incredible to see how this analphabet woman, so adult woman, listening to the gospel and starting to live together, the community, not because we live together in a house, but trying to be in front of the challenges of the life together. They changed, and these poor women were from more and more a very important people for the entire population there. So all the other women were going to ask them to be supported, to be... So we saw really how the gospel can liberate and change the life. You know the story of the, in English, gekrümmte Frau. So the woman who is... and Jesus is healing her. So this was the life of this woman. So really, I would say, just looking at their problems with no hope. Meeting the gospel and the community was really starting to look up and to have hope and to see that they could do a lot of things, that they could change the life of the others. So this was and is our experience with the poor. So as I was trying to say, at the end, you don't really know who is helping and who is helped. So there is a confusion. I would say a holy confusion. Because at the end, each of us could say that we were more helped by being friends of the poor than what we could do for them. They changed our life. They changed their life too. So I met the community of Sant'Egidio in the German school in Rome. I was 16. And a friend of mine was inviting me in the outskirts of Rome. At that time, outskirts, now it's the center of Rome. And for me, it was knowing a word I would never meet. And at 16, to experience that I could do something for somebody else, not only caring for my studies. This was worrying my parents, obviously. But I was going on with my studies, so I was not... But, for example, I met a boy who was 9, whose name was Francesco, a very difficult boy. So he couldn't sit more than 2 seconds on a chair. So quite difficult, very difficult family. And for example, my fight started not only to be what will I do in my life, my career, and so on. But for example, Francesco, what is doing Francesco? I have to speak with the teachers because his parents were not able to speak with the teachers. And look that Francesco was going on in the school and improving. So this was, for the first time, a change. So in my life, trying to caring for somebody else, not living only for yourself, but starting to care and to live for somebody else. This is the gospel.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to open up the room. We've had a lot of input, and maybe there's some questions from you. In light of the ongoing time, I'm asking you to maybe keep it short, and if you feel comfortable, to also pose it in German now, and I will translate for the podium. Yeah, of course.
Ihr habt alle drei davon erzählt, dass es für euch eigentlich ein Geschenk war, mit den armen Leuten zu leben, dass es etwas verändert hat, wenn man selbst helfen kann und merkt, ich kann auch was für andere tun. Und meine Frage wäre, Cesare hat das schon ein bisschen erzählt, wie sich das für ihn verändert hat, aber an Louis-Etienne und Isabelle, meine Frage ist, was hat euch den Mut gegeben am Anfang, dass ihr entschieden habt, ihr wollt in den Banlieues wohnen? Am Schluss war es für euch auch ein Geschenk, aber was hat euch den Mut gegeben und wie hat sich eure Perspektive verändert, dass ihr wirklich in dieser Gemeinschaft mit anderen Menschen leben wollt? Ich glaube, oft haben wir so einen Sicherheitsabstand zu Menschen, die anders sind als wir, ob das jetzt die Armut ist oder irgendetwas anderes, das uns unterscheidet. Aber was hat euch diesen Mut gegeben?
We try to understand the question. Sorry.
What gave you the courage to meet other people and to live in this area that's so different from your normal circumstances? What changed your mind or what made you take this step of courage?
I don't feel at ease with the word courage because I don't feel courageous. I don't think I'm courageous. I try to, but it was an evidence. It was simple. We wanted that. We had the desire. We had some questions, some fears. So we first visited the place. Where is it? How can it be for children? Okay, we have all those questions. But it was quite the first visit. I remember the first visit with a friend of us, a member of Emmanuel community. We helped us to visit the cité, and so we see that it's possible. It's simple. Okay, so very often we put our own barriers, walls, and we think it's impossible to go to go over. And in fact, it's just try to go over, and you see that if it's not possible, you will step back. But so we little step and step by step. I don't know if it's answering your question. Yeah. And in fact, beginning. That's why I explained Haiti at the very beginning, because we suffered from being foreigner. We decided to make a step to welcome foreigner, and step by step, we saw that it's easy and it's cool. It's great to meet other people and to be friends, to be brothers and sisters, it's cool to be with them at home. It's very great. So we want more. So okay, we want to care people, but we receive much more, as Cesare said. So it's the desire is growing.
Am Anfang der Diskussion haben Sie gesagt, dass wir protestieren müssen, gerade bezüglich der politischen Situation. Und meine Frage an Sie wäre, wie protestieren Sie mit Ihrem christlichen Hintergrund?
Die Frage ist an Sie gerichtet oder allgemein? Okay. Also, in English. I think it's important to protest, but I think it's also important to build up something different, build up alternatives, because sometimes it's easy to protest and then to say, okay, I am on the good side. But the problem is to build up something different. So this is, for example, the initiative of the humanitarian corridors. So in front of so many people dying in the sea, we were asking ourselves, it's really the fact that there is no way to help people to enter Italy legally and in a safe way. We found in the European legislation the way to open new paths, proposing the Italian government to issue humanitarian visa and caring for everything. This meant at that time the first agreement was in Lebanon for the Syrian refugees. This was 2015. We received the first 1,000 humanitarian visa. It was not easy. It was a fight with the government of over 1 year. Okay, so it was not that they were waiting for us. And the governments are afraid of handling this subject of immigration. No? This was a left-wing government. So right, left, the left-wing parties in Italy didn't succeed to reach the citizenship for children born in Italy from foreign parents. So this is, we have to say it. But so we said we are caring for everything. This means we are going to Lebanon, we are speaking, interviewing the people, we are doing the naming of the people. So we propose the most vulnerable ones. They have to go through fingerprints at the Italian embassy. Their identity is checked by the police. So we know who is entering the country. And we bring them with a normal flight like we Europeans do, from Beirut to Rome. In Rome, they are welcomed by Italian families, parishes, organizations, and immediately integrated in the society. Because if a family is welcoming a family, it works. Children are going to school, adults are learning the language, and so on. You can find a job. So the idea is that after 1.5, at least 2 years, people can live without help, without support. They are recognized as asylum, the asylum status. They don't enter as already already recognized asylum status. They are asylum seekers. And this works. On that way, we could bring till today 7,000 people from Lebanon, the Syrians, but from Ethiopia, the people from South Sudan, from Somalia, Eritrea, Yemen, the people from Afghanistan. We all forgot what was on in Afghanistan 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago. Everybody was speaking of Afghans and of their tragedy. But today we're speaking of the Afghans who is caring for Afghans. So now we are bringing Afghans from Pakistan and Iran. You could say this is just a drop in a sea, okay? But 7,000 people. First of all, and this we started to do it also in France and in Belgium. Our community is there with some friends. But okay, first of all, I think that each life which can survive, we avoid the death, is helping the entire world. But on the other side, it's also to say, look, there is an alternative. There are new ways that are opened and that the governments can support, because the problem of the just 7,000 is also that the governments should implement it and support it also at the European level. And this is what we are trying. Ursula von der Leyen is saying the humanitarian corridors are a model. Okay, then not just words. So it should be implemented. So I think it's important to protest. But we as Christians have the responsibility to open new ways.
I totally do agree with Cesare, open new ways. And a way to protest is to make the law respected, to make the rights of people respected. And very often, the poorest cannot make their own rights respected. So that's a huge part of. Sometimes you have to fight against administration, in fact, because administration doesn't respect the French law, and you have to ask to put in the court, to ask the court to judge the administration. So it's quite difficult, because if you do that, they say, okay, you do that, so the next time we won't help you to. So but I think it's good protestation. That it's constructive.
Sorry, just a small question. I'm a little bit wondering, because I believe really indeed that meeting the poor means an encounter really can change something. I really believe that. But I'm wondering that I didn't hear anything about this injustice of suffering. Because all these lives you were talking about and examples, this is terrible suffering. And those people, maybe one woman can get up her head again, but still the suffering around her will stay. And this will not change immediately, of course. But how can we go on in this direction, that really this injustice of suffering of these poor can be changed?
If I may answer or try to answer, I think they are, first of all, if you are not daily near to the poor people, you forget the suffering, you forget the needs, and you forget the reason why you want to change the world. So, I mean, the fact that Sant'Egidio, born in 68, in a time in which injustice, inequality was popular in the sense that everybody was speaking of injustice and equality, but what are the people of 68 doing today? So I think the problem is really to stay near to the poor people, not to support, to say things have not to change or we have to accept the suffering. But the first answer we can give is to be their friends, to be near to them. So that loneliness is, I would say, an increased poverty. This is one aspect. But this means also, for example, to do some political proposals that can change situations. Just give an example. I was speaking of the humanitarian corridors, but I will speak of the elderlies. We are strongly against the institutionalization of the elderlies. Why the old people should go in the institutions? They have the right to stay at home and to live at home till the end of their life. I think this is also what everybody of us wants, not to go in an institution in which nobody knows you, where there is not your ambiente, the situation in which you lived all your time. So there is a fight we are doing from the very beginning, because we are close to the aged people, to say they should stay at home. But the pandemic showed us how tragic are these institutions, because more than the half of the dead people were inside the institutions. The institutions were really fallen tramps. So they were there, they get ill, and they died. So staying at home would be different. We, after the pandemic, we could succeed in promoting a new law in Italy with the money from Europe to foster the domestic support and to avoid more and more the institutionalization of the elderlies. And this is really a change because, you know, elderlies are, I would say, big money. There are a lot of people earning from the elderlies. So we have to work that they can stay at home. So I think both. If you are not personally near to the poor people, you forget them. This is quite normal. But then you have to try and to find ways, because you are their friends, to solve or to find ways to support not only them, but also others living the same condition. So this was just an example. I could do a lot of examples.
I will speak in French, thanks to Guillemette. Quand on a quitté notre mission en Haïti,
so when we left our mission in Haiti,
on a dit aux femmes du quartier dans lequel on travaillait,
we said to the women in this place where we were working,
que de nouveaux coopérants allaient arriver.
That new volunteers would be going to come.
Et la seule question que, je pense à une femme en particulier, nous a posée,
and the only question that they put to us, I'm thinking at a special woman,
est-ce que les personnes qui vont venir aiment les gens?
will the people who are going to come to replace you, will they love people?
Donc en fait, cette femme qui souffrait, comme la plupart des femmes en Haïti, de la faim, de la violence.
So this woman, who, like most of the women in Haiti, suffered through hunger and violence,
ne demandait pas si les nouveaux coopérants allaient venir pour construire des maisons, leur donner à manger.
She didn't ask us if the new volunteers who were going to come will build houses or give us something to eat.
Elle demandait s'ils allaient les aimer.
But she was asking if they would love them.
Ensuite, l'amour rend créatif.
And then when you love makes you have ideas, be creative.
Donc quand on vit près de personnes qui souffrent, qu'elles soient pauvres ou riches d'ailleurs,
and when you live close to people who suffer, if they are rich or poor, it's the same.
Si on se laisse toucher, blesser par cette souffrance,
if you allow this suffering to hurt you, to touch you,
cela nous rend créatifs pour inventer des façons de répondre, de consoler, de relever.
This will make you creative to invent ways to answer these needs, to help people to get back on their feet and to console them.
Je pense à un exemple, peut-être que vous connaissez l'association Lazare.
There is this, I'm thinking of this association called Lazarus in France, Lazare.
Des jeunes se sont laissés toucher par la souffrance de personnes en France qui vivaient dans la rue.
It's a bunch of young people who allowed the sufferings of homeless people touch them.
Ils sont devenus amis et ils ont décidé de monter des colocations entre personnes de la rue et personnes qui avaient déjà un habitat.
And they became friends with people from the street, living on the street, and they had this idea to put up some Wohngemeinschaften from people from the street, and I could speak.
Wenn Sie Deutsch können,
ja.
Merci, vielen Dank, danke, thank you so much. Thank you, Isabelle, thank you, Louis-Etienne, thank you, Cesare, thank you all for listening.
Ja, ein großes Danke an euch und wir laden jetzt alle noch ein bisschen mit uns zu bleiben. Wir laden auch ganz herzlich ein in die Kapelle, die da ist, um einen Ort der Ruhe zu haben. Dort gibt es das Allerheiligste ausgesetzt. Wir laden ein zu dieser Zeit der Stille vielleicht noch bis um 10 Uhr. Und wenn jemand noch nicht genug hat von diesem Thema und morgen mit uns eine Holy Confusion live erleben möchte, dann machen wir so eine Begegnung im 10. Bezirk bei der Keplerkirche. Dort wird es eine offene Kirche geben, wo wir Menschen begegnen wollen, die dort leben. Viele aus anderen Religionen, anderen Kulturen und manche auch ärmer als wir selbst. Und am Vormittag kann man noch einmal Louis-Etienne und Isabelle hier erleben, die noch einmal ein Zeugnis geben. Also wer Interesse hat, herzliche Einladung. Ab 9:30 Uhr beginnt hier ein sogenannter Emanuel-Tag und am Nachmittag um 3 Uhr sind wir in der Keplerkirche. Also einfach auf uns zukommen und fragen, wer gerne mitmachen möchte. Herzliche Einladung.
Ja, nur noch eine ganz kurze Werbeeinschaltung zum Schluss. Es ist so, nämlich wir haben relativ viel vom Projekt Le Rocher heute gehört und zu hören, das ist gut, nur wenn man es erlebt, ist die Erfahrung viel, viel stärker natürlich. Und wir erleben das heuer zum zweiten Mal mit dem Politikseminar, also mit jungen Studierenden, Young Professionals, fahren wir konkret nach Paris in wenigen Wochen. Es gibt noch Plätze für die Reise einerseits, aber auch fürs Politikseminar. Also wenn jemand diese Kultur eines neuen Miteinanders, eines neuen Dialogs ganz live erleben will in Paris, dann ist er richtig, einfach bei mir heute melden oder draußen liegen Flyer. Würde mich freuen, wenn noch der ein oder die andere mitkommt. Genau, ansonsten danke an alle, die diesen Abend möglich gemacht haben. Wunderbar, danke euch ganz herzlich und jetzt einen schönen Abend uns allen noch. Danke.